The air was thick with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter, but none of it was for me. I sat at the edge of the patio watching my family celebrate like I was just another guest who happened to show up. It was my 30th birthday, but you wouldn't have known it. There were no banners with my name, no cake waiting for me, just smiling faces gathered around someone else, raising their glasses high. For a moment, I thought maybe they had a surprise planned, something hidden just out of sight. I held on to that tiny hope the way a child clutches a balloon in the wind. I tried to smile. I tried to remind myself that it didn't matter. I was used to being the background noise in my own family. I had survived worse. Across the yard, I spotted my mother, Francine, laughing and adjusting the collar of my sister Sienna's new fiancé. My father, Edward, stood a few feet away, sipping his drink silently like he always did. Sienna, of course, looked radiant in her perfect white sundress, soaking in all the attention. Everyone had gathered for her today, and I, Adelaide Cole, Addie, the daughter who always blended into the background, sat quietly, feeling smaller than ever. I thought that would be the worst part, being forgotten again. But then the gate creaked open. A man I had never seen before stepped inside. He looked out of place in a battered leather jacket and worn boots, his face tense and searching. He scanned the crowd, passing over the dozens of faces turned toward Sienna. And then he saw me. His entire body shifted, like he had finally found what he was looking for. He walked straight toward me, his boots crunching over the gravel. The air seemed to still around us. Conversations dimmed into an awkward, humming silence. He stopped a few feet in front of me, his chest rising and falling fast. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke, but his words were clear. "You don't know me yet," he said, locking eyes with mine, "but I'm your real brother." For a moment, the world felt suspended in midair. Then, like someone had dropped a match into a dry forest, the entire party exploded into shouts, gasps, and confusion. And for the first time all day, every single person was looking at me. I woke up that morning with a strange kind of hope buzzing under my skin. It was my 30th birthday, a milestone that felt heavy with meaning even if no one else seemed to notice. I told myself it would be different this year. Maybe they had something planned, something small but thoughtful. Maybe this time they would really see me. The house smelled like fresh-cut grass and lemon polish when I came downstairs. The backyard was already transformed. Strings of pastel lights zigzagged overhead. Tables were set with floral centerpieces and gold-rimmed glasses. A 3-tiered cake sat on a long table, frosted in perfect white, though my name was nowhere on it. It was the kind of party people posted about, the kind you looked at and thought, what a beautiful family. Francine, my mother, was in the middle of it all, arranging plates with the kind of manic energy she always brought to anything involving appearances. She wore a pale yellow dress, her hair pinned neatly back, a strand of pearls around her neck. She barely glanced at me when I walked outside. "Oh, Addie, good, you're here," she said, not pausing in her work. "Help me light the candles before people start arriving." No happy birthday, no hug, just another task on her list. I moved mechanically, setting up the candles, trying not to let the familiar ache settle too deep. My father, Edward, was sitting at the patio table with his newspaper and a cup of coffee, removed from the flurry as usual. He gave me a small nod, the kind of gesture you might give a neighbor, not your daughter. By noon, the guests started trickling in. Family, friends, neighbors, people I barely knew. They hugged my mother, they shook my father's hand, they laughed and complimented the decorations. I stood to the side, smiling politely, waiting for someone to notice me. Then Sienna arrived. She floated in like a movie star, her white sundress catching the breeze, her newly manicured hand flashing a diamond ring so large it nearly blinded me. The crowd surged toward her instantly, gasping, cheering. My mother clapped her hands together, beaming with pride. "She said yes," Francine announced loudly, her voice carrying over the music. "Our Sienna is getting married." The backyard erupted in applause. I watched as people crowded around Sienna, offering congratulations, snapping pictures, laughing and crying. Plates of food were abandoned, drinks were spilled. The entire party shifted its orbit around her. I stood there, frozen, still holding a lighter in my hand. A wave of shame flushed up my spine. Maybe it had been naive to think today would be about me. Sienna had always been the sun, and I had always been the moon, visible only when she wasn't shining. It was just more obvious today under the pastel lights and perfect skies. I edged toward the dessert table, scanning for some small clue that someone had remembered. Maybe there was another cake hidden somewhere. Maybe there was a card with my name on it. But there was nothing. Only the white cake with a tiny sign stuck into the frosting that read, "Congratulations, Sienna and Blake." Cassie, my best friend since college, had called me earlier that morning. I should have listened to her. "They better go all out for you," she had said. "You deserve it." I had laughed then, brushing her off. Now, standing alone while my family celebrated without me, that laughter felt like a betrayal. I pulled out my phone and stared at Cassie's last text. "Happy 30th, Addie, I love you. Don't let them make you small today." I shoved the phone back into my pocket and blinked hard against the sting in my eyes. My mother floated past me, brushing imaginary dust off Sienna's shoulders. She didn't even notice me. I finally forced myself to walk over, weaving through the clusters of people. "Mom," I said quietly, touching her elbow. She turned, startled like she hadn't even seen me standing there. "What, Addie? Is something wrong?" I swallowed the knot in my throat. "It's my birthday," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Today's supposed to be my birthday." Francine's mouth tightened. She gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh. "Sweetheart, you're 30. You don't need a big fuss. Sienna's engagement is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Try to be supportive." Her words hit harder than a slap. I stepped back, nodding stiffly, my heart folding in on itself. She didn't even realize how much she had hurt me. Or maybe she did and didn't care. I drifted back to the edge of the yard, clutching a plastic cup of watered-down lemonade. I watched as they passed Sienna from guest to guest like a trophy, their faces glowing with admiration. I didn't belong here. Not really. As I stood there, invisible to the people who should have loved me most, a sharp sound cut through the celebration. The creak of the old iron gate swinging open. I turned and everything began to change. The gate swung open with a low, grating sound that cut sharply through the music and laughter. I glanced toward it without thinking, expecting to see another neighbor arriving late with a bottle of wine in hand. Instead, a man stood framed by the wooden posts, a stranger who looked completely out of place. He wore a battered leather jacket despite the heat and had a guarded expression, like he was ready to bolt at the first wrong move. His hair was messy, a little too long, and his boots were dusty like he had walked across town to get here. There was something raw about him, something unsettled, like a storm gathering just out of reach. Nobody else seemed to notice him yet. They were too busy clinking glasses and snapping photos of Sienna posing with her hand splayed to show off her new diamond. I stared, feeling the air tighten around me. The man's eyes swept across the crowd once, twice, and then they locked onto me. Not past me, not near me, directly at me. I froze. Something inside me stirred, something deep and instinctive that I could not explain. Without hesitating, he started moving, straight toward me. Each step he took seemed to pull the world tighter around us. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I barely heard the low hum of conversation falter as people finally noticed him crossing the yard. Heads turned. Whispered questions passed between groups. Who was he? What was he doing here? The man stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough that I could see the worry etched into the lines of his face. His hands were trembling slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "You don't know me yet," he said, loud enough for the people nearest to hear, "but I'm your real brother." For a moment, nobody moved. The words seemed to hover in the thick Georgia air, heavy and unbelievable. Then chaos broke out. Guests gasped and clutched at each other. A woman near the dessert table dropped her drink. My mother's hand shot to her mouth in shock. My father rose from his chair so quickly it scraped against the stone patio. Sienna let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, looking back and forth between me and the stranger like she was waiting for someone to yell that it was a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It couldn't be. I stared at him, trying to speak, trying to move, but my body refused. The words, "real brother," echoed in my mind, colliding with 30 years of assumptions, 30 years of lies I hadn't even known were there. My mother was the first to recover. She stepped between us, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "I don't know who you are," she said sharply. "You need to leave, now." The man's jaw tightened. He did not move. "You know exactly who I am, Francine," he said, his voice rising. "You stole her from us." A A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Several people backed away, pulling out their phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. My mother turned to me, her eyes wild and desperate. "Adelaide, listen to me," she said. "He's lying. He's trying to confuse you." But her voice was shaking. Her hands were shaking. I looked at my father, searching his face for some kind of anchor, some kind of reassurance that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But he would not meet my eyes. He just stared down at his shoes, shame written in every line of his body. My stomach dropped. My skin prickled with cold. I turned back to the man. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Eli Madden," he said. "I'm your brother. You were taken from our family when you were a baby. Our mother never stopped looking for you. I never stopped looking." The ground felt like it was tilting under my feet. I gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But something inside me, something stubborn and battered, kept me standing. I stared at my mother, the woman who had raised me, who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had packed my lunches and driven me to piano lessons. The woman who had also, apparently, built my entire life on a lie. The crowd waited, silent and expectant, all eyes on me. I felt my voice scrape its way out of my throat. "I want to know the truth." Francine's face crumpled for a brief second before she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, the mask of control snapping back into place. "There's no truth to find," she said tightly. "You are our daughter." But the words rang hollow. They fell into the heavy, accusing silence without finding purchase. Eli looked at me with a mixture of hope and heartbreak so raw that it cleaved something open inside my chest. I took a step toward him, and in that moment I made a decision that would change everything. The air around me felt sharp and thin as I took that first step toward Eli. I could feel the dozens of eyes following me, the whispered conversations swelling behind me like a rising tide. My family watched in stunned silence, frozen in place, unsure whether to pull me back or let me go. I stopped just in front of Eli. Up close, he looked even more real. His eyes, the same deep brown as mine, were red around the edges, like he had been carrying too many years of unshed tears. His hands twitched at his sides as if he wanted to reach for me but did not know if he was allowed. I opened my mouth, but the questions crowded too quickly to say just one. Instead, I asked the only thing that mattered. "How do you know?" Eli's voice was steady when he answered, but pain lived in every word. "We have the same birthmark," he said, "on our left shoulder blade, like a crescent moon. Our mom used to kiss it every night before bed and call us her moon twins. You were kidnapped from the park when you were 2. They said you drowned, but she never believed it. She searched for you until the day she died." I felt my knees weaken. I reached instinctively for the back of a nearby chair to steady myself. My mind raced through fragments of childhood memories. The strange scar I had always wondered about but was told was a surgery mark. The way my mother flinched when anyone mentioned adoption stories. The family photos that only started after I was around 3 years old. I heard my mother behind me, her voice tight and commanding. "Adelaide, this is ridiculous. That is a coincidence. This man is trying to manipulate you. Do not let him confuse you." I turned slowly to face her. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was pale, but her eyes still blazed with authority. She expected me to obey her. She expected me to fall in line, like I always had. For most of my life, I would have. But not today. Not after standing invisible at my own birthday party. Not after seeing the desperation and hope in Eli's face. Not after feeling the weight of every tiny moment that had never quite made sense. I let go of the chair and stood upright, my voice stronger than I thought possible. "I want to see it," I said. Francine's mouth opened, ready to protest, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I need to see it for myself." Eli nodded without hesitation. He shrugged off his jacket and pulled the collar of his t-shirt down. And there it was, a small, perfect, crescent-shaped birthmark on his shoulder blade, just like the one I had seen in the mirror my whole life. The world tilted. I pulled my own collar aside and heard the collective gasp from the guests as I revealed the identical mark on my back. Silence fell over the backyard. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I turned slowly, scanning the faces of the people I had called family for 3 decades. My father looked away, guilt carving deep lines into his face. My mother stood rigid, her mouth tight, her hands trembling. Sienna stepped forward, her voice uncertain. "Addie, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe Mom and Dad had their reasons." Her words were meant to soothe, but they only stoked the fire rising in my chest. I met her eyes and saw for the first time that she did not understand. She had always been the one chosen, the one celebrated. She had never known what it felt like to be the afterthought, the second choice, the forgotten daughter. "There is no reason good enough for this," I said quietly. The words tasted like ash on my tongue, but they were true. I turned back to Eli. He stood there, still waiting, still offering a choice without forcing it. For the first time all day, someone was giving me the chance to decide who I was going to be. I nodded. "Let's go." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother called my name, a desperate plea, but I did not turn back. Eli offered me his jacket. I slipped it over my shoulders and followed him toward the gate. Every step I took felt lighter. The house, the party, the heavy expectations, all faded behind me. I did not know where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in my life, it would be a road I chose for myself. As I stepped through the gate, I realized I had not lost a family today. I had found a piece of myself I never knew was missing, and I was not going to let anyone take it from me again. The gate slammed shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of the party like a door closing on an old life. Eli and I walked quickly down the driveway, my pulse racing so hard I could barely hear anything else. I clutched his jacket tighter around my shoulders, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of leather and something warm and real that made my throat tighten. He opened the passenger door of a battered blue pickup truck parked at the curb. I hesitated for a heartbeat, glancing back at the house where my entire life had just collapsed. People were spilling into the yard, staring after us, whispering, pointing. My mother stood frozen on the porch, her hands clenched at her sides, her face unreadable. My father remained seated at the patio table, head bowed as if the weight of his own silence had finally crushed him. I slid into the truck without another word. Eli climbed in beside me, his hands steady as he started the engine. We drove away slowly at first, then faster once we cleared the neighborhood. The farther we went, the easier it was to breathe. The sun dipped low in the sky, throwing long shadows across the road. For a while, neither of us spoke. I stared out the window, watching the houses blur past, each one a reminder of the life I had thought was mine. Finally, Eli broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You deserved so much better than this." I turned to him, studying the sharp set of his jaw, the sadness etched into his features. There was no performance here, no manipulation, just a brother who had lost something and spent years clawing through the dark to find it again. "You were just a kid," I said. "You didn't have a choice." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. I never stopped looking. I promised her I wouldn't. "Her?" I asked. "Our mom, Leah Madden." The name hit me harder than I expected. Leah Madden, my real mother, a woman whose face I did not remember, but whose love had apparently stretched across decades and distance to find me. Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, folded carefully into a square. He handed it to me without speaking. I unfolded it slowly. The picture showed a young woman with dark curly hair and kind eyes, holding a chubby toddler who looked so much like me that my chest ached. There was no mistaking it. The little girl's birthmark was visible on her bare shoulder, clear as day. Tears blurred my vision. I brushed them away roughly. "She never gave up," Eli said, his voice thick. "She hired private investigators. She put up flyers even when people told her it was hopeless. She moved towns just to chase down the smallest tips. Every birthday she would bake a cake for you and light a candle. She said if you could feel her love from wherever you were, maybe it would bring you home." I pressed the photograph to my heart, feeling the weight of every missed birthday, every empty chair at a dinner table I never knew was waiting for me. "She died 2 years ago," Eli said, "but I kept looking. I couldn't stop. I had to find you for both of us." The grief hit me like a punch, not just for Leah, but for all the stolen years, all the memories we could have had, the life that was ripped away before it even began. "I wish I could have met her," I whispered. "You will," Eli said. "I have her journals, letters she wrote to you. She knew she would find you. She just ran out of time." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of those words settle over the raw places inside me. The truck pulled off onto a small overlook that faced a wide field stretching out toward the horizon. Wildflowers dotted the grass. The sun hovered just above the hills, setting the sky on fire with orange and gold. Eli cut the engine and we sat in the stillness. "You are not alone anymore, Addie," he said. "You never were." The truth of it wrapped around me like a shield. I had spent 30 years believing that love was conditional, that attention had to be earned, that being seen was a privilege given to the lucky few. And yet here was proof that love could be unconditional, fierce, relentless, that I had been wanted all along, even when I had not known it. I leaned back against the worn seat, the photo still pressed to my chest, and allowed myself to believe that maybe, for the first time, I was exactly where I was meant to be, not invisible, not forgotten, found. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in deeper shades of gold and crimson. Eli and I sat on the hood of his truck, legs swinging over the edge, quiet comfort settling between us. I traced the edges of the photograph with my fingertips, memorizing every curve of my mother's face, every shadow of the little girl I had once been. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was not heavy. It was steady, like a heartbeat. A different kind of silence than the one I had grown up with. This silence was full of understanding. It asked for nothing. It simply let me be. I tilted my head back, watching the first stars prick the sky. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice steady. Eli smiled, a real, unguarded smile that softened the sharp lines of his face. "Now we start over," he said, "at your pace, however you want." The simplicity of it made my chest ache. No demands, no expectations, just an open road and the chance to walk it on my own terms. Eli pulled out his phone and scrolled for a second before handing it to me. A photo filled the screen, a little house with peeling paint and a bright blue door, a garden overflowing with sunflowers and tomatoes, 2 dogs sprawled across the porch like kings. "Our place," he said. "Yours too, if you want it." Tears welled up again, but this time they came from something different, something lighter. I handed the phone back, my hands trembling. "I want it," I said. For 30 years, I had lived like a guest in my own life, waiting for scraps of approval that never came. I had twisted myself into someone smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. But standing at the edge of this new beginning, I realized I did not have to be that girl anymore. I had been chosen. I had been found. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Cassie's contact before I pressed call. She picked up immediately. "Addie, are you okay? I saw the posts. People are saying crazy things." I laughed, a real laugh that cracked open something inside me. "I am okay," I said. "Better than okay. I found my real family today." There was a pause and then her voice, full of warmth and fierce loyalty. "I always knew you were meant for something bigger than them." "I just needed a little help finding it," I said, glancing at Eli, who grinned and shrugged like it was no big deal, like he had not just dragged me out of the wreckage of my life. We hung up after a few minutes, promising to meet soon. I put my phone down and stared out over the field, the stars multiplying by the second. "I used to think love had to be earned," I said softly, "that if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe someday they would see me." Eli shook his head. "Love like that isn't love," he said. "It's control." The words settled into me like seeds, finding cracks I had not even realized were there. They made me feel like I was too much and not enough at the same time, I said. "All my life." "You were never the problem," Eli said. "They were." The final piece clicked into place. I had spent so long blaming myself, measuring myself against impossible standards set by people who only loved the version of me they could control. I was never broken. I was stolen. I stood up on the hood of the truck, arms stretched wide toward the endless sky. I breathed in the cool night air, the scent of wildflowers and open spaces, and let it fill every hollow part of me. "I'm not going back," I said. "Good," Eli said, laughing, "because we have a lot of birthdays to catch up on." I climbed down and leaned against the truck, feeling solid in a way I never had before. I was not just someone's afterthought. I was not the second choice. I was Adelaide Cole Madden, daughter, sister, survivor, and I was finally free. As we pulled away from the overlook, I took one last look at the town that had tried to hold me captive and smiled. It had lost its power over me. Home was no longer a place. It was not the walls I had grown up inside or the people I had spent so long trying to please. Home was a feeling. Home was knowing you were wanted without having to shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's expectations. Home was sitting next to a brother who never gave up on you, watching the stars light a path you were finally ready to follow. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. If this story touched you the way it changed me, take a moment to think about the people in your life who have always seen you, even when you felt invisible. Family is not just who raises you, it is who chooses you, who fights for you, who reminds you that you were never too much and never not enough. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If you felt something while watching, please like this video. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that they are never truly alone. I would love to hear your thoughts, your stories, or just your reactions, so please leave a comment below. I read every one of them. And if you want to hear more true stories about resilience, love, and finding your way back home, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to come, and I would be honored to have you on this journey with me. See you in the next video. Right as I was about to say "I do," a voice sliced through the warm spring air. It's not too late to back out. I blinked. My heart stuttered in my chest. Standing in the second row, wearing a tight, forced smile and a dark green dress that clashed with the soft whites and golds of our wedding theme, was Evelyn Weston, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Grant's mother, the woman who had spent the last year pretending to accept me, all while making it clear she thought I wasn't good enough for her son. Every single guest froze. Forks hovered mid-air. Someone let out a soft gasp. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. I could feel all those eyes turn toward me, waiting to see how I would react. My hands started to tremble, but Grant squeezed them firmly in his, grounding me. I turned slightly and met his eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. Only me, like I was the only person who mattered in the world. I took a breath, willing my face to stay calm, even as humiliation and shock battled inside me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and Evelyn had decided to make it about herself. But before I could even open my mouth, Father Brendan, the priest officiating our ceremony, took a step forward. His expression, usually warm and easy, shifted into something unreadable. He looked directly at Evelyn, his voice calm but cutting through the heavy silence with sharp precision. "You were not invited," he said, his tone heavier than any of us had ever heard before, "and neither was your secret." A wave of stunned murmuring swept through the crowd. Heads snapped back to Evelyn. Some of Grant's cousins whispered to each other, their hands flying to their mouths. Even my own mother, Diane, stiffened in her seat, her hand reaching instinctively for my father's. I stared at Evelyn, watching the color drain from her face, then flood back in a hot, angry red. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something else, but no sound came out. The priest stood firm, not moving an inch. Next to me, Grant let out a slow, quiet breath and kept his fingers laced tightly with mine. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing either. He didn't have to. His silence spoke louder than any words he could have said. He had made his choice. In that moment, standing at the altar, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's defined by loyalty, by love, by who shows up and who tries to tear you down. Evelyn had thrown her last punch, and for once, she wasn't going to win. Everyone waited, some still chewing slowly, as if trying to act normal but unable to look away. The entire wedding, frozen in a single breath, teetering on the edge of something that felt much bigger than all of us. And somehow, deep in my chest, beyond the fear and the embarrassment, I felt something else rise up. Strength. If this was the worst she could do, then she had already lost. I squeezed Grant's hand back, squared my shoulders, and prepared to take my vows. No matter what Evelyn had planned, today was still mine. The day had started with the kind of warmth that only South Carolina in spring could deliver. Golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees wrapped in twinkling fairy lights. The air smelled like fresh roses and vanilla from the bakery next door. Every detail had been planned with care, down to the soft instrumental music floating across the courtyard and the lace runners draped over reclaimed wood tables. It was the wedding I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, the kind of day where everything felt touched by magic. I stood just behind the heavy oak doors of the chapel, gripping my bouquet so tightly the stems bit into my palms. My heart thudded against my ribcage, not from fear but from a tidal wave of emotions I had never felt so strongly before. Love, hope, a little anxiety, sure, but it felt small compared to the joy pressing against my chest. My father, Mark, stood beside me, adjusting his tie for the third time and sneaking glances at me like he could not believe this moment had come. My mother, Diane, wiped a tear from her eye as she straightened the delicate train of my dress one last time. I caught her eye, and we both smiled. We had made it. No matter what life had thrown at us, today was happening. Grant was waiting for me at the altar. I could picture him perfectly, standing tall in his tailored navy suit, his sandy blonde hair a little messy from running his hands through it nervously. His deep-set green eyes, the ones that had looked at me like I was the center of the universe since the night we met, would be fixed on the doors, waiting for me to appear. The thought steadied me. He loved me. He chose me. Nothing else mattered. Well, almost nothing. Somewhere inside, buried under all the happiness, a small knot of tension twisted in my stomach. It had a name. Evelyn Weston, Grant's mother, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. From the beginning, Evelyn made it clear she had a vision for her son's future, and it did not include me. She never said it directly. She was too polished for that. Instead, she wielded passive-aggressive comments like weapons. "Cassidy, you are so simple. Grant always imagined a different kind of life." Or, "It's sweet you want to keep teaching after the wedding, but eventually you'll want something a little more ambitious, won't you?" Every conversation with her felt like standing on a trap door. Still, for Grant's sake, I had smiled through every forced brunch, every critical remark about the wedding plans, every disapproving glance at my modest family. I had told myself it would get better, that once we were married, Evelyn would see how much I loved her son and how happy we were together. Maybe then she would finally accept me. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Grant tried to shield me from most of it. He stood up to her when she crossed a line, always calm, always firm. "Mom, Cassidy is my family now," he had said after Evelyn made another snide comment during our engagement party. She had pasted on a tight smile and apologized, but her eyes burned with resentment. Even leading up to the wedding, there were warning signs. At the rehearsal dinner, Evelyn arrived an hour late without explanation, wearing white, pretending it was a coincidence. She criticized the catering choices and suggested the floral arrangements were a little pedestrian. Grant's father, Robert, kept his head down, silently enduring it all the way he always had. Still, no one expected what happened next. As the doors opened and I stepped into the aisle, the world melted away. It was just me and Grant. Every chair, every decoration, every whisper of disapproval from Evelyn disappeared when he smiled at me. It was a smile that promised 1,000 tomorrows, a life built together, a love that could weather any storm. I floated down the aisle, every step lighter than the last. My parents beamed with pride. Friends and family leaned closer, some wiping tears from their eyes. I reached the altar and took Grant's hand, feeling the solid warmth of him, the silent promise that we were doing this together. Father Brendan began the ceremony. His voice was steady, grounding us as he spoke about love, partnership, and faith. The air buzzed with anticipation as he came to the question. "If anyone knows of a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever, hold your peace." The words barely hung in the air before Evelyn's voice rang out, slicing through the moment like a blade. "It's not too late to back out." My body locked up. The dreamlike spell shattered. Suddenly, I was back in my body, back in reality, standing on the altar with 150 pairs of eyes on me, every breath caught in their throats. This was not just a wedding anymore. It was a battle for my future, and I was not going to let her win. Time slowed as Evelyn's voice echoed through the courtyard. "It's not too late to back out," she cried again, louder as if the first time had not been enough. I gripped Grant's hand tighter, his fingers wrapped firmly around mine, anchoring me to the earth while my head spun. I could hear the scrape of a chair, a faint murmur rippling through the crowd, someone's fork clattering onto a plate. Faces blurred around me, but every gaze was locked on the woman in the green dress who had just shattered the most sacred moment of my life. Grant did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me, steady and certain, refusing to let her pull him away from what we were building. The priest, Father Brendan, closed his book and looked up, his expression unreadable. For a few seconds, he said nothing, letting the heavy silence speak louder than any words could. I could feel my father rise halfway from his seat, anger flashing in his usually calm face. But my mother tugged his arm, shaking her head. "Not here, not now." This was my moment, and I had to decide how to handle it. Inside, my chest ached with humiliation and betrayal. I wanted to scream at Evelyn, to tell her she had no right to ruin this day. I wanted to cry, to run, to disappear. But above all that pain, something harder and stronger rose up inside me. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I straightened my spine, turned slightly toward the priest, and stayed silent. Grant squeezed my hand again, the tiniest of nods passing between us, invisible to everyone but us. We were in this together. Father Brendan took a breath, then spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the restless crowd instantly. "Mrs. Weston," he said, addressing her without any warmth, "you were not invited." A collective gasp shuddered through the audience. I watched Evelyn's face twitch. For the first time since I had met her, she looked unsure, like the world she controlled with cutting words and veiled threats was tilting out of her grasp. "And neither was your secret," Father Brendan added. His voice was sharp, final, the kind of voice that ended arguments rather than starting them. The murmurs grew louder. I could hear snippets. "What secret? What is going on?" Chairs creaked as guests shifted, craning their necks for a better look. Evelyn's hands clenched around her small clutch. Her lips pressed into a hard line, but her eyes darted nervously around the courtyard. She opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but no words came. Grant's father, Robert, sat frozen beside her. His face sagged with something that looked a lot like shame. I stood at the altar, my heart pounding, my mind spinning through every interaction I had ever had with Evelyn. What was she hiding? How far was she willing to go to keep it buried? Father Brendan took a step forward, lowering his voice just enough that everyone leaned closer to catch his words. "This wedding will not be disrupted by someone who tried to bribe me to lie and sabotage it." The air cracked like a whip. I blinked, not sure I had heard correctly. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, her face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. A few guests gasped openly now, hands flying to mouths, heads whipping back and forth between me, Grant, and Evelyn. Father Brendan continued, his voice unwavering. "Last night, Mrs. Weston offered me a substantial sum of money to object during the ceremony, to fabricate a reason these two should not be joined. She hoped I would create enough doubt, enough chaos to stop this marriage from happening." More gasps. Someone in the back dropped a glass. I felt my knees weaken, but I locked them tight, refusing to collapse. I had endured a year of subtle attacks from this woman. Now everyone finally saw her for who she really was. Grant turned, his jaw tight with anger, his voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, if you cannot respect the woman I love, if you cannot respect me, then you are no longer welcome in my life." There was no drama in his voice, no yelling, just the heavy certainty of a door closing. Evelyn wavered where she stood, clutching her bag like a shield. Her gaze flicked around the courtyard, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But the sea of faces she had expected to charm now stared at her with disgust and disbelief. Slowly, without another word, Evelyn turned and walked away. The sound of her heels striking the stone courtyard echoed long after the heavy chapel doors creaked shut behind her. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I could feel the weight of 150 guests holding their breath, unsure what to do, what to say. Then, as if on cue, Grant lifted my hand, kissed it gently, and turned back toward Father Brendan. We were ready to finish what we started. Not even Evelyn could take that from us. As the heavy chapel doors closed behind Evelyn, I felt the weight of her presence lift from the courtyard like a sudden change in the weather. For a moment, no one moved. The crowd sat stunned, as if unsure whether the ceremony could continue after such a brutal disruption. I stood frozen, Grant's hand still clasped in mine, the words I had carefully memorized for months slipping through my mind like water. Then Grant looked at me. Not at the crowd, not at the priest, not at the wreckage his mother had left behind, only at me. His green eyes locked with mine, and everything else faded away. In that look there was no anger, no fear, no regret. There was only love, uncomplicated, steady, and strong. I could have fallen apart. I could have crumbled under the weight of humiliation, fear, and betrayal. But as I stared back at him, I realized something that changed everything. Evelyn's words, her schemes, her disapproval, none of it had the power to break us unless I let them. This moment, this marriage, this future we were about to build belonged to us, not to the people who wanted to control it, not to the voices that tried to plant seeds of doubt. It was mine. It was ours. I made my decision right then, standing at the altar dressed in lace and hope. I would not let her steal another second from me. I gave Grant the smallest nod, a simple gesture filled with all the strength I had left. I was ready to go forward no matter who had tried to stop us. Father Brendan watched us closely. For a brief second, I saw the tension in his shoulders loosen, as if he had been holding his breath, too. He gave a small, approving nod and opened his book again. But before he could speak, Grant turned to face the guests. His voice carried across the courtyard, steady and sure. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he said. "Today is about love, about building a life together, one based on trust, respect, and the kind of loyalty that stands firm even when it is tested." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the wind seemed to quiet to listen. Grant tightened his grip on my hand and smiled, a smile so full of warmth and certainty that my heart steadied in my chest. "I stand here today because I choose Cassidy. I choose her honesty, her kindness, her strength, and nothing and no one will ever make me question that." A ripple moved through the guests. A few nodded, some wiped at their eyes. I caught sight of my mother dabbing at her cheeks with a handkerchief, my father's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Robert Weston sat with his head bowed, his hands clenched in his lap, saying nothing. He looked smaller now, diminished without Evelyn towering beside him. Father Brendan cleared his throat, smiling now with real warmth. He turned back to us, inviting us to continue our vows. I could feel the tremble in my hands, but I pushed through it. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and spoke the words I had waited my whole life to say. "I, Cassidy, take you, Grant, to be my husband, my partner, my best friend, my safe place. I promise to stand with you, to trust you, to love you fiercely and fearlessly for all the days of my life." My voice never wavered. Grant's vow came next, just as strong, just as certain. "I, Grant, take you, Cassidy, to be my wife, my heart, my home, my future. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to laugh with you, and to fight beside you for every step of our journey." We slid the rings onto each other's fingers, hands steady now, surrounded by a silence so deep it felt sacred. When Father Brendan pronounced us husband and wife, a cheer broke through the courtyard. It was not the polite clapping of strangers, but the roar of people who had witnessed something real, something fought for and earned. Grant pulled me close and kissed me, and for the first time all day my knees gave out. He caught me easily, laughing softly against my mouth. We were not just surviving, we were thriving, and we had chosen each other, even when it would have been easier to run. Especially then. As the applause faded into a happy buzz and guests began to move toward the reception area, I let myself take the first deep breath I had managed all day. I was married. Despite the chaos, despite the attempt to tear us apart, we had stood firm. Grant laced his fingers with mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a small, comforting motion. We walked together down the aisle, heads held high, weaving through a sea of smiling faces. Some guests clapped us on the back, others hugged us tightly, whispering how proud they were. I felt the warmth of their support wrap around us like a shield. But not everyone celebrated. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Robert Weston. He stood awkwardly near the edge of the crowd, his hands jammed into the pockets of his gray suit. His face was pale, his eyes darting between us and the direction Evelyn had fled. Grant squeezed my hand once before letting go. I watched as he crossed the short distance to his father, the tension in his shoulders clear. For a moment, Robert hesitated, as if unsure whether to speak or simply slip away unseen. Finally, he lifted his head and faced his son. "I'm sorry," Robert said, his voice rough. "I should have stopped her." Grant studied him for a long moment. The hurt was visible in his eyes, but so was something else. Acceptance. "You didn't create her choices," Grant said, "but you let her believe she could hurt us and get away with it." Robert swallowed hard, looking older than I had ever seen him. He nodded, the motion small but genuine. Then he turned to me, his voice breaking slightly. "You deserve better than the way she treated you. You both do. I hope someday you can forgive me for not doing more." I nodded, not out of obligation, but because I understood now. Some people fought their battles loudly. Others surrendered so quietly you barely noticed until it was too late. Grant returned to me, his expression lighter than it had been in months. We walked together toward the reception tent, where music drifted through the air and the smell of barbecue and sweet tea mingled with fresh flowers. Father Brendan waited near the entrance. He greeted us with a warm smile, but there was a glint in his eyes that told me he was not finished speaking the truth. When the guests were settled and the first course had been served, he stepped forward with a microphone, tapping it once to call attention. "Before we move into the celebration," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "there is something important that must be said." The guests hushed instantly. "Today we witnessed not just a marriage," Father Brendan continued, "but a victory over fear, over manipulation, over deceit." My heart pounded as I listened. Many of you may not know the full extent of what Cassidy and Grant faced in the days leading up to this wedding. Attempts were made to undermine their bond, to create doubt, to turn love into fear. But love, rooted in truth, cannot be shaken by lies. It cannot be bribed, bought, or broken. Heads nodded around the tent. My mother dabbed at her eyes again. Even my bridesmaids, who had managed to keep their cool through everything, looked visibly moved. "This couple stood firm," Father Brendan said. "They chose each other, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Today is not just a celebration of marriage. It is a testament to what it means to truly love, to choose loyalty when it costs something, to choose trust when it is tested, and to choose forgiveness even when bitterness would be easier." The tent filled with applause, stronger and louder than before, not just polite clapping, but the kind of cheering that came from people who understood the battle that had been fought and won. Grant pulled me into his side, resting his forehead against mine for a moment. I could feel the steady beat of his heart, the surety of his love. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe it fully. We had not just survived today. We had triumphed. As the music swelled and our friends and family rose to dance and celebrate, I realized that the story of our wedding day would not be about Evelyn's betrayal. It would not be about the ugliness she had tried to bring into this sacred moment. It would be about resilience, about love, about standing tall when everything around you tries to knock you down. And as Grant led me onto the dance floor for our first dance as husband and wife, I knew with absolute certainty that we had built something no one could ever destroy. Not now, not ever. The reception glowed with life. Laughter, clinking glasses, the soft shuffle of feet on the dance floor filled the tent. Every corner of the space radiated warmth and celebration. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to relax fully, to breathe in the joy around me without waiting for the next disaster. When Grant twirled me around the dance floor during our first dance, I forgot the ugliness that had tried to creep into our day. His hand pressed gently against the small of my back. His smile was easy and real. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the music, the lights, and the love surrounding us soak into every part of me. This was what mattered. This was what had survived. Throughout the evening, guests came up one by one to hug us, to share kind words, to express how moved they were not just by the ceremony, but by the strength we had shown. Even people I barely knew smiled at me with a kind of respect I had not expected. We were no longer just a newly married couple. We were proof that love could hold steady, even when everything tried to tear it apart. My parents found me near the cake table, my mother's eyes shining with pride. "You were magnificent, Cassidy," she said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You handled yourself with more grace and strength than I think even you realize." My father nodded, his arm wrapped firmly around her. "You didn't just marry a man today, sweetheart," he said. "You chose a future where fear doesn't get to speak louder than love." His words settled into my chest, warm and grounding. Later, Grant and I sat under a string of golden lights, plates of half-eaten cake in front of us, watching our families and friends dance and laugh together. He turned to me, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. "You know," he said, his voice low but certain, "I always thought today would be perfect. Now I know it already was, even before it started. Perfect doesn't mean flawless. It means real." I smiled, feeling the truth of it sink deep into my bones. Perfect was not everything going according to plan. Perfect was standing together when the plans shattered. Perfect was laughing through the tears, dancing despite the heartache, loving even harder when tested. As the night wore on and the stars blanketed the sky above us, I thought back to the girl I had been when I first met Grant. Hopeful, yes, but cautious too. Unsure if she could really trust that happiness would last. Today, I became someone new, someone who had faced betrayal and chosen forgiveness, someone who had stood in front of a crowd and refused to back down when everything inside her begged to flee, someone who had realized that true love is not measured by grand moments, but by the quiet, stubborn decision to stay, to believe, to fight. I realized that family is not always made by blood or marriage certificates. Family is made by the people who choose you, who lift you when you fall, who stay when staying is hard. Evelyn Weston had tried to tear us apart. In the end, all she had done was show everyone how strong we really were. Her secret had not poisoned us. It had set us free. Grant squeezed my hand and kissed the back of it, his smile soft and sure. "Here's to us," he whispered. "Here's to the vows that meant something, the promises made not just in easy moments, but in the hardest ones. Here's to the courage it takes to choose love over pride, forgiveness over anger, and hope over fear." As we rose to join our friends and family for one last dance under the stars, I knew that no matter what storms came, we would weather them together. Not because we were perfect, but because we were real, and that was more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to live through, but standing here now, I would not change a thing. Every tear, every hard moment, every painful choice brought me closer to a life built on real love, real loyalty, and real happiness. If this story touched you, or if you believe in choosing love over fear, please take a second to like this video. It really helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that even in the middle of chaos, it is still possible to find your way to joy. I would love to hear your thoughts too. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone trying to tear you down? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your words mean more to me than you can imagine. And if you want to hear more real stories about life, love, and the moments that change everything, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There are so many more journeys ahead, and I would be honored to share them with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and remember, you deserve a life filled with love that chooses you back.